Hi, everyone on Facebook and YouTube. Welcome to my fourth installment of Storytime Sundays. This story is called Under the Weather. This story is about a pastor who pastored a multi campus church. His name is Camden Cornwall. And Camden always knew he wanted to be a pastor from when he was young. He felt the calling to be a pastor. And he met his wife. She was his next door neighbor. And they went to elementary school together, high school together. And when they got to their senior year of high school, feelings started to change. And when he went off to Bible college, she went to nursing school to become a nurse. And then after college for him and nursing school for her, they both came back. And then a year later, they realized that the chemistry was still there. When they came back, they realized that the chemistry was still there, and they both felt God was calling them to get married. So they did. So they got married, and their church started in a little storefront, but little is much when God is in it. So the church just started to grow and grow and grow and grow until they couldn't fit in that storefront anymore. So they started adding places and adding places, and he started training pastors until their campuses got really huge and their ministry was exploding. And at about the 10-year mark, they wanted to expand and to include a shopping center, a health complex, a school, and all of that. So they had this fundraising campaign for the church. And what happened was, halfway through this fundraising campaign, it was discovered that money for the campaign was going into the pastor's personal account. And so when all this scandal had broken out, because not only people in the churches in the campuses had donated, but other ministries and other pastors had donated as well, because this man had such anointing on him. And he tried to say that he didn't do it, but the evidence on his embezzlement was so much, it was so damning that nobody believed him. They had bank statements, and they had people say that he was that he coerced them to give money to the project, and all of this damning evidence. So anyway, he went to jail on charges of embezzlement for 2 years. And when he got out, he lost everything. He lost his marriage while he was in jail. His church scattered, and he lost his marriage. He lost his ministry. He lost everything, everything but his faith. And and then after he got out of jail and after he served his sentence for embezzlement, he became a recluse up in he became a recluse because nobody wanted him to preach everywhere. It was just anywhere. It was just horrible. So he became a recluse and bought bought land and built a cabin because aside from being a pastor, he was a master carpenter, master builder. So he bought a cabin and decided to live up there alone. And he decided to live up there alone. And then there was a journalist who was very ambitious. She wasn't a Christian, but one day her boss gave her this story of this preacher and this whole embezzlement scandal, and told her that if you can find out where he is and get the true story and get details about this embezzlement case that the police weren't able to find out, you will get a promotion. So this person was totally for it. Like she said, yes, give me this story. I'm tired of working in the copy room. Because what happened is she went to journalism school, all set to be a journalist and travel around the world. But the only job she could get when she looked for a journalism job was as a copy editor. And she said, and when they hired her, when they hired Cindy, that was the journalist's name, they said, oh, you'll get a better position later once you prove yourself. So, but by the time she got the story on Pastor Camden, I think his name was Camden. If it's not, then it is now. When he got the story on the pastor, she was dying to get out off of the coffee room. She was dying to get, she was dying to get stories that actually meant something instead of just copy editing. So in her research, she found him. She found this pastor who had basically he was one of the biggest pastors in the world, and then this scandal broke out, and you never heard from him again. People never heard from him again. So she found him, and at first, he didn't want anything to do with the journalist, but and he didn't trust her at first, and she was like, "Well, don't you want the world to know your story? What ha- what happened to you? What really happened? Your side of the story?" He's like, "I already tried that, and nobody listened to me. I tried that in the trial, tried that in appeal."
Call from mom. Call from mom. Call from mom. Call from mom. Call from mom.
He's like, "I already tried that," and she's like, "Please, I really want your story to be told." He's like, "You don't want my story to be told. You just want a boost to your career." He's like, she's like, "Please, at least just let me come in. It's cold. I traveled a long way and it's snowing." Um, and he eventually lets her in. Now, what nobody knows is she's when 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 the reporter was 19, something happened to her, and she seemed to have blocked it out. But every night she's had nightmares about what has been happening, what happened to her when she was 19, but she's not sure what it is, and it's been plaguing her and plaguing her. So when she got this story, not only is she dealing with the story, but she's dealing with um, this this vision of violence, whatever violent thing happened to her, and she can't figure it out. She's been to therapists, she's been to everyone. Like, she's been to therapists, counselors, doctors, and nobody could figure out what happened to her when she was 19. And when she speaks, when she sits down with this pastor, at first he's so um, belligerent towards her. He's angry because nobody has ever listened to his side of the embezzlement scandal. And about the, and she was like, "You know what? This was a mistake. It's, I'm going to leave." He's like, "Well, fine, leave then." And then when she was about to leave, there was, he had a little TV, and on the TV it said there would be a weather storm and all roads were closed. And so she had to stay in this room. She had to stay in this spare room in the pastor's cabin. He had an office and and his room and the spare room. And so, but she was afraid to let the pastor see what she's actually going through at night. Nobody knows what she's going through at night. Like all these visions and all these dreams, and something violent happened to her when she's 19, but she blocked it out what happened to her. And she doesn't know what happened to her. So, because of this storm and because of having to stay with this pastor, um, uh, they, the first night she has to stay with this pastor, she has that horrible dream of violence and somebody attacking her violently, and she doesn't know fully what went on. And then the pastor wakes up and to go to the bathroom, and then he hears screaming. And so, because he hears screaming, he, without thinking, he runs into her room and says, wake up, Cindy, wake up. And then she wakes up, and then she's so afraid that she's crying, and he holds her while she's crying, and then he says, "Are you okay?" And she says, "Yeah, I'm fine," like very defensive. And then he says, "Okay, I'll leave the room." And so he leaves. And then the next morning, okay, she says, "While I'm here, why don't you tell me your side of the story? Your side of the story and what happened?" She, he's like, "Okay." He's like, "I started in ministry uh, at a small church." He's like, "I started in a small storefront, and my wife and I, it just grew. And then when I, but as it grew, I wanted to do more than just have a church. So I wanted to build a hospital, build a school, build a health club, build a bank. So I got these board members together. I checked them all out. They were all uh, board members of integrity, and they all just were awesome and wonderful people. And she's like, "Okay, when you said you checked all the board members out, every pastor that was on this board for these places to be built, and everyone, you said you checked all of them out. Did you have any he, he said, she said, did you have any suspicions about what went on with these people at first?" He's like, "No, I had no suspicions. Everyone was wonderful and caring, and they all had wonderful suggestions about how to get this vision from a church to a life center that would improve lives in so many other ways." And then she said, when's the first time you discovered money was missing from the account?" he was like, well, I didn't discover it. It was my CFO, my chief financial officer, discovered that um, about $2,000 was missing from the what should have been in the fundraising account. And, and when we discovered that the $2,000 was missing, we did some investigating. We thought maybe that it got put into another account by mistake. We thought maybe someone miscounted and it was $2,000 short. We did everything, and then still it was $2,000 short than what we should have had in that account. And then we, and then again, about 2 weeks later, $5,000 was missing. We did the same thing with now the $7,000 that was missing. We did the same thing as we did with the $2,000. Just money just kept on getting missing and missing. And the reporter said, well, when did you discover it was in your own account? He said, you see, this is the strange thing. When the $2,000 went missing, I didn't see it in my account. But when the $5,000 went missing, I only saw $2,000 extra dollars than what I should have gotten paid by the church. And as more money went missing over an incremental period of time, I only started to see a little bit of it at a time show up in my bank account. And then suddenly, large sums of money started showing up in my account. And basically, at the end of the day, every penny that went missing showed up in my personal account. And that's when the investigation started. And so as the pastor was talking, the reporter looked at his body language, everything, and she said, something about this isn't right. So when she went to sleep that first night, something was niggling at her. She couldn't find out what it was. And she decided to look online at the public court record of all the public things that she could get her hands on. But she just, so as she looked, it was as he had said. She looked at the court documents, she looked at the police reports, the parts that were public. She looked at everything she could find, and everything was as he said. But the lawyer, there was something funny about the lawyer, his lawyer, and the other lawyer from the other side. Something didn't sit right. Some research wasn't done. She decided to look deeper into what was going on. So, because it was still snowing, she began to really research this with her laptop. And she kept on having the suspicion that something about the lawyer he hired for the church and the lawyer that the other side hired was fishy. Like something didn't seem right. So as she looked deeper, she found out that evidence and and but she couldn't look much deeper than public records um, up at the cabin because it was snowing and um, she couldn't have access to private records, um, but she made up in her mind that when they got away from this cabin, that she would find out the truth. And meanwhile, she was still having these nightmares. And when every night she would scream and um, she would have like an episode of terror that someone was being very violent towards her. And every night he would run in and and um and then he would calm her down and then he would leave. He would leave her alone. And then the next morning everything would be fine. She would do her research and stuff would be like they would talk about the case and she would do research uh, to find out what happened, who put the money in his personal account. Um, um, and one day, um, after, while they were having breakfast, the pastor said, "Well, can I ask you something?" And she said, "Yes, go ahead." Because at that time um, they had developed a kind of relationship, a platonic friendship. He was like, every night you seem to be having these dreams. I thought they were from the court case and the stress and trying to prove my innocence in the embezzlement matter, but I think it's something else. And she sighed. She said, something happened to me when I was 19 and I walked it out. And he's like, tell me how you grew up. And she's like, what does that have to do with anything? He's like, well, if you relive your memories, something might occur to you that you didn't think of before. So if we go chronologically back into your life, something may have happened that you didn't think of before. And she's like, okay. So she told him where she grew up. She told him that her home was happy. She told him that her parents were nominally Catholic. She told him all of this. stuff about her childhood, how her mother and father loved each other, and then and then she went through her teens, how she was an A student, how she loved school, loved her family, um, how she wasn't a person of faith, but she was a really likable person. She had lots of friends, and and he got to the she got to the point when she was 19 and retelling all her childhood up to that point. Um, and then she's like, she's like, but when I was 19, something happened. Something that I'm still dreaming about. Um, and she was like, I went to this party. No. And then the pastor said, because she tried and tried and tried to remember, but she couldn't remember what happened. It was still blocked out. But what happened is when she went to bed, because her mind had cleared of what had happened in her childhood, her memories slowly started coming back. Um, and she began screaming out the pastor's name one night. And she said, uh, um, and she began like to tell him, I I went to a party, and she's like, in high school I was a really social person. I went to a party and then my friends left me in a room with this guy, but I still don't know really what happened, but all I know is after something happened and after they left me in a room with this guy, the nightmares started. I don't know if that guy did something to me. I don't know if I was raped or harassed or what, but all I know is something about that guy really changed my life. So when the snow stopped, they finally, um, she finally was able to go up, to go away from the cabin and do some more research about what had happened. And she she did some research. She got she got court documents that she couldn't obtain around the internet. She did a lot of deep digging, and she still couldn't let it go. There was something about this lawyer that the church had hired. Um, and one day, when she was just about to give up on finding who put the money in his personal account, she ran across the name Delphi, in the report, and all of a sudden, something about that name jarred her memory. It was, and as she continued reading, she realized that Delphi was a lawyer now that had helped in the defense of the pastor. And then, but there was something else about that name. She couldn't leave it alone. It was really just um, what had happened. Um, she couldn't leave it alone. There was something about that name, um, Delphi, that jarred her memory, that she didn't know how to leave alone. And when she went to sleep that night, she finally knew why that name was so familiar. The the young man that her she had a flashback of her friends um, saying, Thomas Delphi is so cute, and they were laughing and they were laughing, and they, Thomas had said, you, um, her friends had said, you should really, her friend said, you should really do him. He's hot. And they left her in a room with this Thomas. And more of her story came that Thomas actually drugged her drink with a date with rape drug, and not only he raped her, but his friends gang raped her and really just, and then what had happened, she lost consciousness because she was beaten and raped so badly by this Thomas Delphi. And then she woke up, and then after she woke up, she was screaming. She's like, I remember. And she ran to the pastor's room. She's like, I remember what happened. And so she told the pastor what had happened to her. And he was like, Thomas Delphi has been our lawyer for years. When I got in trouble, he was the first person I called because I trusted him. He was so good in everything. He was not only a good lawyer, but he was good in financial matters. The pastor's like, I cannot believe that he would be doing something so heinous to you. And she was like, he did. And it turned out, looking at Thomas Delphi, what happened is that looking into this Thomas Delphi guy, he had a bunch of financial debt. He had gambling debt. and looking into his accounts, when she did some research on his business accounts, his personal accounts, it turned out that he had gambling debt, that he was trying to um, get rid of, and he owed bookies money, he owed all these kind of people money, and it turned out that it was him who uh, assaulted her, sexually assaulted her, and got people to gang rape her. And also, he he was the one, um, after tracking the money that was put into the pastor's account, eh, they got proof that he was the one transferring the money electronically to the pastor's personal account. But he was so clever that he hid, um, that he got rid of the evidence that he was involved in any way, and managed to frame the pastor. So it was the same guy hurting both of them. And if it wasn't for that time in the cabin, the time when they were under the weather in that cabin together, and if it wasn't for her questions, and her constantly digging to find out the truth of what had happened to him, she would have never found out the truth of what she was missing in her life. And through a course of events after the case broke, uh, Thomas Duffy was charged with rape, with oh my gosh, sexual assault, embezzlement, uh, just obstruction of justice, everything. And one guy um, did this in both their lives. So if she hadn't have gotten this case, she wouldn't have found out what had happened to her, and the pastor would have still been under suspicion of embezzlement. And through and when the trial was over, um, he was able to lead her to Christ. And then years later, when they had gotten married and all that stuff, they started a ministry just telling their story and what had happened and her nightmares and the embezzlement charges. And the church that they started, it was an it was a unorthodox church that would bring millions of people to Christ, more than what he had before. And that's the thing with God, is sometimes he takes you through trouble, and at the end he gives you more than what you had before. If he had 20 campuses before, he had 40 campuses then. And that's my story today, called Under the Weather. Because if they weren't together in that place under the snowstorm and in that cabin, their lives would not have been changed. So to them, being under the weather, the pastor and the reporter was a good thing. So join me next week for this. I hope you guys are enjoying Storytime Sunday. I know I am. I hope you guys are enjoying this. Thanks. Be blessed. Bye. See you next week.